Well, if you've clicked on this episode, chances are that's been you. Click, 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 trying to pick up all of the edges that you need to make a fillet happen. In this episode, we're going to take a look at some techniques that you need to have up your sleeve if you want to make those selections quick and painless. I'm Jesse, and here are some solid ideas. Now, in order to look through these techniques, we're going to look back to the model that we created in episode 1 with this sort of diamond pattern. And to get these fillets in here, we see that there are a lot of edges to work with to try to get all of these in. We've got all of the top edges of the pattern, all of the bottom edges of the pattern, then all of the vertical edges of those, and also where it bounds with the pocket itself. There's a lot of edges to select. Now, the first of our selection methods that we'll look at is manual selection. This is going to be a nightmare in this scenario, and to be honest, in most scenarios, it's probably the scenario that's led you to this video with me thinking there's got to be a better way. And there is most of the time. However, there are some other tools that you can use in combination with manual selection that really might help you out. So we're going to take a look at that first to cover those, because sometimes you do need to just select the thing that you need to select. And there are some things that will make that easier on you as well. So I'm going to roll this back so that we have the fillets turned off, and then we can go back and investigate some methods of selection that we can use to turn these back on or add them back in. Now, the first thing that you might think in this scenario is, okay, if I've got to manually select these, I'm not going to select edge by edge by edge, but I might want to do this with a box selection method. So if we look at this geometry, it's already pretty rectangular. That lends itself well to box select. So if we come up along in here and try to box select this, the first thing that we'll notice is that our cursor feedback says, nope, can't do it. Now, the reason why the cursor feedback is telling us that is because SOLIDWORKS has it turned off by default that you can't select over the geometry. Normally, most of the time when we're selecting the geometry, it's for some purpose, not to accidentally select things. So what we can do to fix that is to right click in free space, hit the drop down for selection, and you'll see that there is an option in here that will allow us to select over geometry if that is what we want to do. So we'll select that, select over geometry, and now this will allow us to make that selection if that's what we're after. Now, do be aware that the box select option has two different directions to it as well. You may know this already. If we go left to right or top to bottom, that will create this blue selection box. Whatever is within that bounds will be selected. If we go the other way, though, we see a different color box. We get a green one. And that selection will pick up the things that it has touched. Now, I use this method mostly when I'm in sketches. Usually if I'm picking things up by faces or edges or whatever in the graphics area, I use the blue one and just grab everything that's fully inbound. That seems to be the most predictable way to do that. Now, there is another thing that you can do to help out when you're making those manual selections, and that is to use the filter tool. So F5 on your keyboard will bring up the filters. Now, you may have accidentally turned these on with keyboard shortcuts and wondered what happened, or you may be comfortable with using them already. But you can see that this little toolbar that pops up here, I have mine docked to the bottom, will allow us to filter things out by the type of thing that we want to select. So if there is something that's getting in your way or you're constantly picking up the wrong thing, you can turn on a filter that will only allow you to select edges or only allow you to select faces. Whatever it is you're trying to grab, you can do that. Now, you'll get that little cursor feedback there with a little funnel looking filter icon letting you know that something is being filtered, so you know that it's turned on if you want to do that. And again, if you've accidentally turned them on, you'll see that too, indicating that some filter has been turned on. You can turn them all back off again with this little clear all if you want to do that, and that will turn them back off, or you can use the toggle to turn them on and off. And again, F5 on the keyboard turns that on. So that can be a nice way to filter things out and just make that manual selection process easier by not mistakenly selecting things that you didn't want to select. Now, we looked at the box selection, but this is a rectangular case that might have worked okay. That's not always the case, though. You don't always have just square or rectangular geometry. So do be aware also that in the selection options, we see that there is oops, let me get back in there. There is in this dropdown both a box selection and a lasso selection. They work both the same way, right? We can do the both methods of selection. So we can select one way or the other, and that will pick things up in that regard. So if you need to loop around something, you can use that selection method, or if the box selection works better, you can use that one. Either one, they work the same way. It's just a different way to select different regions. So those are nice ways to use that. Now, also, there is a little trick for selection in here as well in SOLIDWORKS, that if you select or pre-select something that you want to select and then hit Control A to select all, that will select all of that type. So for example, if you select one edge, Control A, that will select all of the edges in your model. So if it's something where you're trying to get all of those external edges to be filleted and every single one of them needs to be picked up, that might be a good solution for doing that as well. I'm not going to do that here because there's a ton of edges to get picked up and I don't want to wait for them. But that could be a potentially useful method for you. Okay, now with those options out of the way, let's take a look at a tool that the fillet itself has built into it that will allow us to make faster selections, since that's kind of what these selection methods are geared towards. Let's launch the fillet tool itself. I'll use my S key and select the fillet tool. And from here, we can make a selection. And when we make that selection, we want to pause for a moment and take a look at the options that we get. So let's select one of these vertical, for example. And as soon as we do that, before we go move away and start, clicking away and trying to select all of the things that we want to select, take a moment and look up here in the context bar that pops up. And we see that we've got this little AI selection or pre-selection predictor for us. I always check this, or most of the time I'm doing fillets, I check this because this will predict what similar types of fillets might need to be added based on the thing that you just selected. So it's sensitive to what you've just clicked on. So you can see that as I move my cursor across these, it's looking through the model and saying, okay, what else is like this that he might be trying to select that I can do for him? Right, and we can see that this third one over, this gets all of the vertical edges that we need to get picked up with one click and then a click on the filter. So this little prediction filter, this little AI tool will almost always save you time. And I try to use it every time I can, or anytime that I have similar selections to pick up or repetitive selections, because it will almost always get me most of, if not all of the selections that I'm trying to make. And this is a perfect use case for it because these are all basically pretty much identical, but you'll see that it's not applied to just identical selections, because as I'm moving across there, it's picking up different things. So in this case, we see that it's picking up all of the diamonds, but it's also picking up all of the vertical edges around the bounds of there. So this is a great way that you can use, just scan through them and see if one of them might save you a bunch of time. And I'm pretty sure that in most cases, it probably will save you a bunch of time. Now, that's a great one. That will save you time, almost guaranteed. But we've only been working with edge selections so far, and that is not the only thing that fillets can be applied to, right? And I would say, in fact, most of the time, it's one of those things where it might not be ideal to only be selecting edges. What I mean by that is, if we clear this, to grab all of these fillets around these top edges, that would be quite a pain to select. Again, we have that fillet AI tool that would probably do a pretty good job with that for us. But then we would end up with a pretty long list of edges that we have selected, whereby if we select this top face, it would do exactly the same thing, right? If we made this selection to the top face, that would select all of the associated edges that are associated with that face. So it would pick up every bounding edge that is touching something else, or in this case, touching the sides. And it would pick up all of those fillets in one single selection. Now that's a great way to speed things up, certainly by selecting one face, but we can take this one step further as well. So let me clear this out again as well. And with our tree expanded here, let's take a look at what else we might be able to select. For example, let's select this cut extrude itself. If I pick this up, you'll notice that this selection box for items to fillet actually will pick up the entire feature. And with that, it will take all of the associated geometry that comes with that feature to be potentially filleted. Now, this is pretty cool in this case because I've already got fillets up here in these top pockets. So it's not going to override those fillets, but you'll notice that down here, this gives me a massive advantage because it's already selecting all of those little faces, all of those little diamond faces that are on the bottom, because those are the faces that are associated with the feature that I used to create that before the ribs got added in. So this gets quite a bit of selections for me, in that it gets all of these tiny little faces that are now tiny little faces, but were one face to begin with. And it also selects all of those faces around the outside as well. So this gets me essentially everything that the ribs are coming in contact to with the rest of the model with one selection. Now, this is a great scenario because I have, again, already filleted these top pockets. So the only thing for this feature to add the fillets into are to the region where I want this to be applied. But let's take this back a step, because there's actually a technique that I use to kind of expand on this a little bit more if I need more control. So again, this works great in this scenario, but what if I needed to take these out? Maybe I didn't want these to get filleted, or whatever the case is. Maybe it's a more complex scenario where selecting the feature gets most of what I want, but not everything. It gets too much, and I need to dial that back because it's harder to remove them than it is to gain the advantage of making that selection. What I do in those case scenarios is to tweak this with a little trick that you can use to visually tell what's going to be selected. So let's roll our tree back here to a point in time where we just have the feature that we want to work with. So again, I want to select just this pocket region, and I don't want to select the other ones, but they were all created with one feature. What we can do is use our appearances to actually tag these. So if I drag an appearance on from the appearance library, we see that we get this filter that will allow us to apply this to whatever it is we want to apply this to. Now again, if I select this, the feature, we see that that will tag visually all of the faces that we were just picking up in the fillet itself, right? But now I want to say, okay, I want these ones, but I don't want these ones. Well, now we have the opportunity to visually remove the areas that we don't want to have picked up. So for example, I can take this appearance and I can add this over to this face. I can repaint them with the appearance that I don't want. So Control-Shift-C, Control-Shift-V, I copied and pasted the appearance onto that face. And from here, we can control this however we want to. So I can come in and maybe we can edit this face appearance and we can add some to it. So I want to add these faces and these edge faces that kind of bound these pockets as well. So let's add in these ones. I'll right click here and say select tangency, and I'll do that on the other pockets too. Select tangency and right click and select tangency. Okay, from there we'll say okay. So now visually we've separated the pieces that we want to have selected with the pieces that we don't want to have selected. And at this point you might be saying, okay, well that's nice. I can see what it is I want. How am I going to do anything with it? Well, if we right click in free space, we can use our drop down again. And there's a tool in here that doesn't get used too often, but that's called Power Select. Now from Power Select, if we open this up, Power Select lets you select all sorts of things with more granularity than you can with any of the other tools. But one of the options that's in here that I use in these scenarios is this one called Face Color. Now face color, you can do this by feature color as well. But in this case, we've kind of tuned our feature down to just the areas of the feature that we want to pick up. So face color will select whatever it is that we have here in the model. So in this case, we can select this by whatever color it is that we want, or we can just pick by the graphics area and say, this is the face that I want, the face color that I want to have picked up, find the rest of those. So when I hit search there, that brings up all of the faces that are associated or tagged in that color. And that lets us kind of pre-select visually what it is, that region that we want. Now, in this case, this doesn't make a lot of sense because this is a pretty simple selection. But still, in areas that are more complex that you would need to tune or select just part of a feature, and that gains you a lot of advantage in selecting somewhere else, this is an excellent way to do it. Now, once I say close to this, that selection stays up, and we can now use that selection for whatever it is we want. Now, one of the other things that you might want to do at this point is to save a selection, right? If you make a complex selection, in this case, pretty straightforward, but if you make a complex selection, the last thing you want to do is click off and accidentally ruin it, or maybe you need to come back to it later. So right click in free space, and you can come down to Save Selection. add a new selection set. And what that will do is that will add that to your tree, and then you always have that available to come back to. So if you deselect this region, you can see that all of these faces are still in here. We can just select that and pick that back up again at any point in time. So if there are complex selections, there's also our previous selection option that we can use. That can come in handy if you've accidentally deselected things. But if you're making those complex selections, I would recommend saving that. That way you've got it and you can always come back to it, and you can always remove it later if you don't want that anymore. Now, again, in this scenario, maybe we don't want that this appearance anymore. We can remove that at any point. It doesn't need to be there anymore. We're just using it for tagging purposes. So we're free to move on and do whatever we want with that, and we still have our selection available. So it's a nice way to be able to kind of take your time and pre-select things if you have those complicated selections that are maybe that selecting that feature gets you almost exactly what you need, but it may be harder to work your way back out of it. You can fine tune that to one way that you can, grab that and say, I want all of the feature except for this one little part. And you can get that done pretty quickly. Now for the final result, how did I do it? Well, let's roll all the way to the bottom. And I can explain what it is that I did here. So I used a combination of all of the methods essentially that we have talked about in this episode. So first, I use the selection of the feature itself, right? So we grab the feature, and the feature gives me all of the edges, the surrounding edges, the top edges, the surrounding edges, the bottom edges, and everything but the top and the vertical edges. So then from there, I selected that top face. That gave me all of the top edges, leaving only the vertical edges to be selected. I selected one vertical edge, and then I selected the filter that we were looking at in the AI selection filter, and that grabbed all of the vertical edges. So if you think that you can get this type of a fillet done in less than 3 selections, throw it down in the comments. I would love to see that done, and we will see you guys in the next one.